YouTube live, but I can see it's going. And so at least I know audio is working. All right, if you are joining us, we're going to let a few more folks join us before we get started, but feel free to drop your name, say hello in the chat, tell us where you are from. We are so appreciative of you taking time to be here with us today. Let's see.
That's when there was just so much interest in the session. You're like, this is the beta test of the YouTube live. Like, yeah. So I love your transparency. Like, I'm figuring it out, but I'm going to do it.
Figuring it all out. Yes, yes. So if you are watching on YouTube, thank you for joining there. I'm going to do my best to try to monitor the chat over on both. So hi there for everybody. I'm going to do like this. That's how you know I'm like looking at my YouTube screen. Hi for over here on the webinar. Also, we've got some folks from Vancouver. We've got some folks from, let's see, hey, Nashville folks, that's my hometown. So hello, hello. Virginia folks, welcome, welcome. Some folks from, let's see, Colorado, welcome. This is great. This is so wonderful. Thank you all. Hello, Cali folks. Rock Hill, South Carolina. Oh my gosh, that is so awesome. I have lots of family that's in that area. So hello to Rock Hill, South Carolina and Missouri. See a good handful of folks from the Bay Area. So we've got a few people still. I see the numbers are still kind of folks getting in here, but we'll get started in just 1 minute. Hi, hello Toronto, hello Charlotte, North Carolina, and Philly. Lots of folks from Canada representing. I love it. So again, thank you all so very much for being here. Thank you all for your patience. Those of you all who were not able to get registered but are joining us over on YouTube, thank you so much. This is all very new. This is a beta. This is the second DEI careers panel that I have hosted as a part of my new business over the last few months. And so I just feel so privileged and fortunate that so many of you all wanted to be here and be a part of this today. And so with that, I just want to jump right in and get started. I'll do a little bit of a brief introduction, and then I'll have all of the panelists get a chance to introduce themselves as well. And so if you haven't seen it, here's a quick little glance at who all we've got joining us today. My name is Andrea G. Tatum. I am the owner and DEI career consultant and advisor over at AGT Diversity Consulting. And when I'm not doing my own business, I also work with Panelists and helping lots of folks to drive their DEI strategies forward. And so I'll tell you all a little bit about my background and how I got into DEI, but I really want to keep space and time for all of our amazing panelists that are here. So just a little bit of background on me. As you may have just heard me mention, I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and currently residing in the Bay Area. I have a background in marketing and nonprofit arts organizations and did that for a large portion of my career. But I always knew that even with the role of marketer, where my job was to really get butts into seats, that wasn't enough. I always knew that there was more that I could do. And I really always prioritized, how do I drive getting more diversity into the theaters? How do I make sure that ticket prices are accessible for folks? How do I make sure that I am really doing everything that I can do to, make theater, which can be a bit elitist, more accessible? So that was always the lens that I had. And I took that through every single job that I had. So looking at who was on the screen, when I was doing digital marketing, what did people see in terms of the marketing that we did? who was being presented on stage. I figured out how to have those conversations with the people who were producing the art, and then just kept going from there. And so even though I wasn't a DEI person in that role, it was really something that I was passionate about and knew that I had the ability within my sphere of influence to impact change. Fast forward several years later, I've pivoted my career a few times. I got into project management into the tech sector, and I got into event planning and got to do international events all over the world. And I still really looked at the work from this lens of diversity and inclusion, and eventually got to the point where I knew that as someone who was really great at connecting people, I've always said that that was my gift, was bringing people together. I thought, I have these skills. I'm a great marketer. I'm a great project manager. I do all these different things. How do I bring that into a way that helps to drive diversity and inclusion within the tech world? And in the role that I was in at Tableau, I saw an opportunity because there was lots of people trying to drive D&I, but it was all kind of all over the place. And I knew that I could help to bring that together. And I came into it from a lens of project management, but eventually I realized that I also was very strategic and had that strategic mindset. And I also had a data-driven mindset. And I knew that I could bring all of those skills to the table to help drive diversity and inclusion forward. And then when the opportunity came to work for Catalyst, and I knew that I could do that for many, many more organizations, I jumped at that. And now I am creating this space for people who are like me, who are passionate and, think about wanting to work in DEI, but aren't sure what that looks like, to better understand a little bit about the journey, the skills, and what it's like to actually do the work. So that's just a little bit about me. With that, I'm going to pass the mic, and I would love for Brittany to jump right in and give her story as well.
Sure. So I'm excited to be sharing virtual space with everyone here today. I am joining from the East Coast. I didn't see anybody shouting out Maryland, but I'm joining from Baltimore or outside of Baltimore in the metro area. Pronouns she, her. By day, I am Vice President of Learning and Innovation with the Winters Group. The Winters Group is a global diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm, proudly Black woman owned. The company's been around for about 36 years, but I've been with them for about 5 years now. That's my day job, all day, every day. If you didn't hear, I'm a Black woman and mom to a 4-year-old who is ever present. And I would certainly add that motherhood, Black womanness, those aspects of my identity certainly influence how I show up in this work. Not only am I a Black woman, I'm someone who doesn't have a disability. I'm someone who is straight. I'm someone who is cisgender. And I name those because that critical self-understanding is certainly something that I amplify and hold up and lift up as a skill in and of itself in this work. And if I am not critically aware of where I have power, where I have privilege, it can show up in my practice. My practice is primarily around learning and education. And so I believe that certainly there is work to be done at the structural and systems level. And it is in those incremental paradigm shifts, our understanding of self, our understanding of others, where we can begin to see ripples in our sphere of influence. And so by day, I curate learning experiences that are designed to shift perspectives and ultimately empower action in service of equity, justice, and inclusion. And I do so with a bunch of awesome facilitators, instructional designers, consultants, and certainly under the leadership of Mary Frances Winters, our president and CEO. As it relates to how I came up into this work, I'm also a proud HBCU grad. Howard, where y'all at? If y'all don't know where we at, this week, we certainly in Washington, D.C. at the Vice President's residence. And so I did my undergrad at Howard. Okay, fams, I see you. I did my undergrad at Howard, journalism major, had no intention on being in the DEI space, actually thought I would end up being the next Oprah. Got to my, fourth year, needed an internship, ended up at Comcast in human resources. I'm like, HR, what? Kind of fell in love with it, HR, recruiting, employee relations, right after Howard, landed a job, go figure, with a leader in the DMV, a government contractor in their employment, engagement, and diversity office. And I'll be honest, I hadn't even known that like diversity was a thing. Certainly there was like my lived experience on a HBCU campus, and certainly like this intrinsic connection to like wanting to advocate and wanting to show up for, but didn't even know that it was something that was, within the sort of like corporate sphere being like operationalized. Fell in love with the work, ended up transitioning into an affirmative action and training role with a consulting firm. Did that for a bit, decided to go back to school for my master's. Georgetown, for those who may be familiar, has a HR management master's degree program with a diversity and inclusion emphasis. Shout out to Sakari Pina, who absolutely shifted my paradigm around this work. And found myself shortly after in a few corporate D&I jobs, community work, and for the past 5 years have been in the capacity of as a consultant, so actually supporting organizations, leaders. I am a self-described overthinker, and so I find myself always like asking the question why, which serves me well, because even in this context, I think the why, give me 1 minute, Brax. I think the why, even in this current climate, is gonna get us to really get into the root of all the injustice and exclusion and manifestations of like whiteness and white supremacy that we experience, certainly on the big screen, but within organizations too. Oh, you found coins. So I share that, and hopefully y'all got something from that. That's my journey. That's where I am. I'm gonna go on mute now, and I'll check.
That is all right. We hold space for real life here. We are all going through so many things and working and living and doing this from our homes. So we appreciate this. And I mean, he's cute, but Brittany told me to stop telling him how cute he was because it only makes him want to get on the camera that much more. But it's okay. Like this is real life. We're all okay with that. So I'd love to pass the mic over to Tara, and please tell us a little bit about your journey and your story into this.
I'm Tara Robertson. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm here on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. So I'm here on stolen land in Vancouver, BC, Canada. I saw a couple of people when they joined from Vancouver shout out and acknowledge the First Nations whose land we're on. And I think when we're talking about power and diversity and equity and inclusion, that's a fundamental thing. I was born here and I grew up in a small logging town halfway to Alaska. My mom is Japanese Canadian and my dad is Scottish and Irish ancestry, he's white. And I came out in my late teens. So being mixed race and being queer, I've had a lot of experiences in my life where I didn't fit. I didn't fit neatly in either category and kind of have a really nuanced view of power. I think when you're outside the majority, you kind of understand what's going on with the majority more than they do sometimes, because you're like really seeing all the nuances and being like, okay, how do I move safely in this space? How do I get in and how do I create space for other people? For the last 3 years, I led diversity and inclusion for Mozilla, a mission-driven tech company that has staff in 16 countries. We are best known for the Firefox web browser. It's funny, I say we. I quit my job last September. I was there for 3 years and I was feeling a little burnt out, and which I'll get into later. And it was great working with that group of people. And before I was doing diversity and inclusion in tech, I was a librarian for 12 years. I was an academic librarian, and the last 5 years of my library career, I ran an accessibility organization that serves students with print disabilities in post-secondary. So I was helping create, or my team was helping to create the disability accommodation for people who couldn't use print textbooks. So students who were visually impaired. The biggest group of students we serve were students with learning disabilities. And in that role, I learned a lot about access needs for different students with disabilities, as well as about inclusive design. Like if we involve people with disabilities from the beginning and co-design with them, we're gonna get something that's a great solution that includes them and actually includes a lot of other people. So one of the great examples of this is a curb cut. So I don't know if you know, like when you're walking on a sidewalk and you come to the intersection, there's a bit of a dip. That allows wheelchairs to roll down. But it also allows people who are pushing like a big cart, me when I'm walking my bike, parents with strollers. It just makes access easier for everyone. And we can see that in the digital space too. So I bring a lot of that subject matter expertise on inclusive design into the DEI work that I do, because I think it's not just about getting the people, policies, and procedures, you know, across the whole employee life cycle right, but it's connecting it through to the core business offering that a business or a business's service or product is. And before I was in libraries, I did a bunch of odd jobs and was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And off and on, I did sex work as well. And I say that because when I was a librarian, I wrote about the ethics of digitizing porn and talked to sex workers whose voices weren't included and decisions were made without their consultation. And I think it's important for us when we have space and power to really own our backgrounds and our identities. Brittany, I loved how you like described yourself and your different identities on who you are and who you're not as well, to have a nuanced understanding of who you are as a professional in this world. And for me, I have to make this disclosure now to companies and to managers. And the way I connect it to this work is that the empathy that I bring and my ability to have awkward conversations with a high degree of professionalism, that's a skill I honed while doing sex work. So that's a little bit about me. I took the fall off and gosh, I was exhausted. So I rested and reflected, which I realize is kind of a privilege to do, to be able to take time during a pandemic to do that. For a while, I was searching for my next job and I wasn't finding what I wanted. So I'm launching my own consulting business next week to do this work with tech companies to drive measurable change in this space. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm loving hearing just even the diversity of entry, my story versus your story, Tara, versus Brittany's. Like, obviously, we all have such different backgrounds, but all with like the same mission and vision. And so I am so excited to hear one last story from my friend. I have been so honored to be on other panels with Pina. And so please come off, share the mic and tell us your story.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm just feeling so inspired by what I've heard so far. Hi, everybody. My name is Pina Tseng. My pronouns are she, her. I am based in the San Francisco in the Bay Area, and I am a senior consultant for the training and people development team at Paradigm. So I've been with Paradigm just over 3 years, but to back up even further than that, I just go way back. I was born in Taiwan. My family immigrated to the US when I was about a year old. And we lived, or my upbringing was mostly in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. And so similar to Brittany, this concept of diversity, of inclusion as a field didn't actually reach my radar until much later in life. But my background's in the behavioral sciences. So I got my undergrad degree in psychology, went to grad school for social psychology, into a joint master's and PhD program. I got my master's in social psych and then did shout out to Cincy, I see in the chat. I did another year of the PhD program, but realized that I didn't really want to do research for the rest of my life. It felt like I love academia, I love people in academia, but for me, it felt like just publishing and getting things on my resume didn't feel very fulfilling. And given that I loved social psychology and teaching it, I wanted to do something that was much more applied. So ended up leaving that program, and thankfully my advisor at the time worked for consulted for a leadership development company. So I worked for them for about 2.5 years as a feedback specialist, where I was interviewing people mostly from the corporate world to talk to their peers, their supervisors, their reports, and just get feedback on their strengths and weaknesses. So through that, I learned a lot about what the corporate environment is like. Had no exposure to that in the past because of coming out of academia. And then that company was actually based in the Bay Area, and I was working remotely for them from Ohio. And on a trip out to San Francisco, I met somebody who had just been through an unconscious bias training with Paradigm. And I didn't really know what that was. I knew what unconscious bias was, but didn't really understand what diversity trainings were or what they looked like. Sort of just had a very broad understanding of that. But I was curious. And so I looked up Paradigm, saw that they were hiring for a training facilitator role, and realized that really fit everything that I was looking for, because it's very data driven, these trainings that we do, and they're meant to create sustainable change in organizations, starting with the individual, but also teams and organizations. So that is the application of that was really, really appealing to me. Furthermore, I've always sort of like the performative element of teaching, actually, and being able to just have conversations with people and connect with them about the content. How do you apply it to their personal experiences? How do you try to get them to make these maybe incremental, but again, sustainable changes in their own day-to-day behaviors? So interviewed with Paradigm, started in January of 2018. So it's about just over 3 years from when I started. And it's been a really great time just being able to have these kinds of conversations with trainings. Of course, they're mostly online these days, but for a time I was also doing a lot of traveling, going into organizations, getting to see what their cultures were like, getting to meet the people. And then, yeah, so it's just been a really fun journey of doing that sort of training, but also advising people on their specific processes that they might want to design around hiring or around performance management, or even just designing like inclusive communication norms for their team meetings, how to support organizations that way as well. So that's my background.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to just kind of, I love that you come at it with one, your background in academia, but then, in the role that you're in, you are not a professional, a DEI professional in-house. And I get asked all the time from people like, I'm really passionate about DEI. I want to do this work, but they don't always know exactly what that means. And I think oftentimes people first think about DEI, as like the chief diversity officer or an in-house position. But you and Brittany both are in positions where you all are working, and now Tara with her consulting role, coming in and working with other organizations. And so when it's not your responsibility, let's say, but you're obviously invested in these companies. Pina, can you tell me a little bit about what does success look like for you in the role that you're in?
Sure, yeah. So a big part of that will vary from organization to organization. Of course, different groups are in different stages of their quote unquote DEI journey. So for example, when we do trainings, we always have a conversation with them ahead of time to learn more about their culture and processes or their specific language that they use. One of the questions that we always ask is, coming out of this work, what are your goals? What would success look like for you? So again, that varies, but a lot of the times it's just having these audiences start to build more of an understanding of how bias shows up in their day-to-day decisions. It's not just using derogatory language or like specifically not hiring someone because of their identity. It might be like who we interrupt in meetings or how we view a name on a resume and things like that. And just so bringing more awareness to that. But then beyond that, also, of course, recognizing that once you build that awareness, what do you do now? Like, how can you check yourself going forward? So personally, I would say that as long as someone takes away one or two things that they can just start doing in the next couple of hours, next couple of days, that's a win for me. Of course, if we can build momentum where collectively they have more of this momentum, maybe they can create more structural changes and that are more sustainable going forward, more processes, resources, that's also a huge win. But yeah, sometimes it's the small things, and that goes a long way.
Yeah, no, that is great. And I want to ask you the same, Brittany. What does success look like for you in your role day to day?
Yeah, and I love that question because a lot of times, sort of like part of my self-work these days has been being very unapologetic about how I define success and value, and just sort of like what that means in the context of this work. So I appreciate that question. And so for me, on one hand, success in my role as Vice President, Learning and Innovation, sort of like part of the Winters Group leadership team, looks like continue to build legacy. And so it's not lost on me that in as much as diversity, equity, and inclusion work it absolutely exists within the organizational context, its roots are very much so in this sort of like much broader quest for humanity, driven by, civil rights movements, Black struggle for freedom. And so all of those things, and being part of that frames like how I see success, and that, continuing to build the Winters Group's legacy, continuing to model thought leadership in this space. And so I joined the Winters Group 5 years ago. It was on the heels of the murders of Alton Sterling and Philandic Still. And at that time, this work was very much so still focused on things like cultural competence, at least in the corporate environment, cultural competence, inclusive leadership, unconscious bias. And I remember one of my girlfriends, she posted on Facebook pretty much saying many of the sentiments we're hearing today. I don't really want to go to work because nobody's talking about this stuff, and it's just weird. Like, I don't even know how to show up. She's a Black woman. So I remember screenshotting that, sending that to Mary Frances, and I'm like, hey, we should be doing something that's responsive to this. I don't know what it is, but we should be doing something that's responsive to this. And that really charted the course for our work around mapping the intersection between what has been traditionally diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the corporate environment and social justice. This is 2016, right? I mean, it's kind of like hit the mainstream now, but that's when we really began to embark on that work. And there were clients, our first lab was race and workplace trauma in the age of Black Lives Matter. And there were clients and people in the sphere who felt like Black Lives Matter on your marketing, that's like a little taboo. We're not ready. And so I offer that as an example because in that moment in time, it wasn't necessarily something that our clients were actively seeking, which could be interpreted as success. If your clients wanted it, success. Success for me looks like actively or figuring out ways to continuously challenge the industry, challenge its work, actually like disrupt the status quo, even in the context of like DEI practice. There's like this notion that by nature of our skill set, by nature of our ability as consultants to write about this stuff, that we are the proverbial choir. And so for me, it looks like even not, challenging our clients, but when I have the consultants and facilitators come back and they're like, you know what, I'm starting to think about this stuff differently. That's huge. You know what I mean? When we start actually naming and calling out systems of exclusion as to what they are, naming like white supremacy culture and beginning to like really lean into discomfort. And then when I notice our clients have really even come along in their sort of like willingness to disrupt status quo themselves internally, that feels like success. Now, certainly in sessions, we have our evaluations that are based off of like Kilpatrick's levels of evaluation. There is one thing we started to execute in our evals is actually having folks reflect on like, how will you change your behavior? So it's qualitative. And so I have found a lot of value and even fulfillment and so success in reading some of the responses. Like in the next 30 to 60, I am planning to. Now, I don't know if they are, but I'm absolutely okay with sort of like planting the seed and seeing that as success. And then the last thing, as we have been doing more work specific to race, racism, anti-racism, I've been very mindful of how we might, if we're not careful, sort of like cause harm, especially in groups where there are Black learners and white learners. making sure that I'm not in our design, perpetuating like emotional harm and toll, right? And like having essentially like Black learners experience their white counterparts work through, you know, the learning and the messiness of it, which is necessary, but certainly not a way that's going to like perpetuate harm. And so we actually started, we've actually since adapted how we deliver learning experiences to address that, and started surveying who do you believe was centered in this conversation? Do you believe it actually disrupted the status quo, or did it maintain it? And so being very specific and direct in that line of questioning, right? Because I could absolutely get it wrong. You know, I could absolutely get it wrong in my good intentions. And so I know that was a lot. So building legacy is definitely the success for me. Continuing to just like disrupt the status quo, not just within the organizations, but just as practitioners and as an industry. And then certainly how folks are being impacted, specifically those folks who are a part of marginalized identities, like how they are feeling about the sessions, whether or not they feel seen, affirmed, vindicated even. That's how I strive to measure success.
I love it, as usual. I'm inspired by your and I love that you're obviously very methodical with your process and how you think about all of this. And I love that you think about, you know, can I, even with your intention of wanting to do good, could I be possibly doing more harm? And I love when I hear DEI folks think about it from that perspective, because it's, you know, just like any other job, you're moving at a fast pace, you know, you pace, and you're being asked to churn out a lot of work and have a lot of deliverables, but you have to be able to take that step back and evaluate and think about, you know, who am I centering this conversation on? What's the value people are getting out of it? And especially people from marginalized group, what's their experience, especially in learning environments when they're sitting through this, and do they suddenly become tokenized? Like that is always my fear when I'm doing, you know, trainings and things, is like, do they feel like their experience is being validated, or do they feel like if they're kind of an only in this room that they are being tokenized? And there's always this balancing act that you have to play. Yeah, so I love that. Tara, I want to jump in because you were in a role where you were in-house. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about a little bit of the nuances there of, for you, what did success look like, and how did you measure that?
There's like a high level, and then there's like the individual level. So I am really results driven, and I like working with like Mozilla is an engineering organization, and engineers are really precise on measurement. And I really like that because we had certain measurable goals around increasing representation. There were two, both women in technical roles and underrepresented minorities, like pretty much the same measurable goals that every tech company has. And like over the 3 years, when I started, women in tech roles were at 13% representation, which is pretty low. And there were a lot of stories like open source is less diverse than mainstream software. Sure, also a bit of an excuse. But over the 3 years, we were able to increase women's representation by 10% up to 23%. So what I like about that is like, there's this big meta goal, and like there's lots of different pieces about diagnosing what's going on. Like to shift representation, most people are like, oh, we want to increase diversity, like hiring. It's like, well, that's part of the equation, but like, let's look at who's leaving the company. And who's leaving, at what rate, and what's going on there. Like, is there a cultural problem we need to solve? Are there issues around safety that we need to solve? Like, do people feel like they have a fair shot at growing their career here and doing the things that they want to do? Do they feel like they're being invested in? Who feels that and who doesn't? So asking some of those questions and making the employee experience more inclusive and equitable helps retain awesome employees from any background, but especially the areas that we were focusing on. And really, really competitive space, and everyone is trying to get top female engineering, Black, Latinx, technical talent. Like, so if a company's not doing a good job, people are smart and talented, and they can get a job somewhere else. So having those company-wide goals were big. They took a long time to move, but seeing change happen there was a form of success for me. On an individual level, everyone's talked about this, but seeing people change their behavior, or seeing people start to ask different questions. For me, that was a huge measure of success as well. So one of the white trans women I partnered with to work on our trans inclusion program grew up in the South. And after we brought Robin DiAngelo in to do a keynote on white supremacy, white fragility. And she was like, I learned more in that 1 hour than I have in 40 years living in America. And she went away and watched that talk many times, participated in the book discussion groups that we stood up. And
oh no, I don't know. Is everybody, I think we lost your audio there for a second, Tara. No, we can't hear you. We'll come back. We're going to give Tara a second to work on her audio there. You want to try now? Are you there? We'll give her a sec. And come back and let her kind of finish her thoughts there. But they're already dropping so many good nuggets of information around success. Do you want to try? We're still not able to hear you. Just all of a sudden went out. But I do want to kind of, I'm going to jump forward to one of our questions, and hopefully we'll be able to get Tara back here in just a moment. Again, we talked a little bit about the fact that people come into the world of DEI from so many different backgrounds. And in my introduction, I kind of talked about like my skill set and the skills. I call myself a skill gatherer, just from the different types of jobs and roles that I've had over the years. Like, I find value in all of the different things that I've done. And so I try to bring those skills into what I do every day. And so thinking about the jobs that you all have now, the roles that you all are in, especially within the learning and development and facilitation areas, what would you say, and I'll start with you, Brittany, are maybe 3 skills that if somebody was to come in today and say, I'm going to take Brittany's job, what are 3 skills that you feel like they absolutely would have to have in order to take your job?
So this is timely because we're I actually am like in the process of like hiring for this fill this role on the learning region team. And so I'm biased because again I come into this space with a strong affinity for its sort of like theoretical and historical underpinnings. And I come into this space that, I wholeheartedly believe that even when corporate America gets off this like diversity and social justice wave, like we will still need to be like engaging and pushing and doing this work. And so for me, a strong command of like social justice principles and the theoretical underpinnings of DEI are huge. Like I feel like, especially if you have the skill set of simplifying some of these like very complex and I would even venture to say like inaccessible terms. And so I think that's huge, like understanding it, but then also being able to like teach it back. That's the curriculum design skill set, right? And so curriculum design is obviously knowing the stuff, but moreover being able to organize it in an experiential way. And so whether that's use of activities, whether that's facilitated dialogue, whether that's allowing the space to take over itself, right? And so the curriculum design piece is huge. I would also say the commitment to living this work in practice. And so it's kind of like the ongoing learner stuff. And so actually like committing to your own learning, committing to like this ongoing curiosity, expanding the curiosity to actually expand one's understanding of this work sort of like beyond the corporate and programmatic. And so I have, for my own personal and professional development, been expanding my understanding of this work in the somatic space, right? And so what equity and justice means in the context of our bodies. And so it's not just the cognitive, because I can know theories all day and still not be addressing where, you know, culture and trauma we know resides, our bodies. And so if I had to summarize them, so the strong command of the historical, theoretical underpinnings, the curriculum design piece, and so being able to take very complex and typically inaccessible topics and teach them back in creative ways. And then 3, this ongoing commitment to just learn and hone one's own practice. Because even if we sort of characterize ourselves as woke, we certainly haven't like arrived, right? And I think that is understated. So.
Yeah, well, and I think it actually, I see this question a couple of times in the Q&A, which is like, you know, are there books? Is there something you should read? Like what all of a sudden makes you a DEI person, right?
Yeah.
And I think the reality is, even when you accept the title of doing diversity and inclusion work, even as practitioners, we are always on a journey. We are always learning. And that's because this work is ever evolving, right? And I talk about this a little bit in my course, but language is constantly evolving. And we have to be able to stay on top of language, stay on top of what's happening in the world, what is happening, and then to educate, right? Like right now, for me, one area that I am really starting to find more interest in and know that I don't have the deep knowledge I should have is around Indigenous peoples. And I've started to learn a lot more, especially as I've been expanding my work and working with some folks in Canada, like the experiences and what I've learned about that. And that comes from just constantly reading, having conversations. You know, as much as I love sitting and just binging on my Netflix, like I do love that, I also find balance outside of, you know, my day-to-day work tasks to consistently be learning new skills, learning new information, and figuring out how to apply that. So I'm going to jump and let Tara, you know, kind of answer this same question, you know, and finish up on what you were maybe saying around what does success look like, but then also what are the skills, you know, that you think that someone would need if they were to come in and say, like, I want to be, you know, in this DEI role that you were in at Mozilla tomorrow.
Can you hear me now? Yay, my ugly old, like, non-high-tech headphones work. So this panel was a great deadline for me. I've been noodling like for months about like what the core competencies are in this profession, and the post just kept getting longer and longer and longer. So I just want to share my main points. Oh, no. Yay. So I think there's actually 5 main points. I won't get into all of them. I wrote 5 blog posts this week getting into them. But if I was to narrow it down to 3, which what your question was, I think it's 1, 4, and 5. So strategy, I think, is really key to drive change in the corporate space. Like, what are you focusing on and what are you not focusing on? And all the different things that are all the programs and ERGs and training, they need to kind of be connected to an overall strategy. Since last summer, like I saw a lot of companies in a really reactive state we need unconscious bias training. It's like, okay, why? Like, what are you trying to solve with that? Or a lot of companies have also invested in ERGs, and like that's an interesting question. People are like, do you think ERGs are good or not? It's like, well, it kind of depends. How are they connected to the strategy? How are senior leaders supporting the grassroots leaders in the company to really get visibility? And like, who's taking accountability? Like, it can't be the ICs who represent different communities. It can't be on their shoulders to drive a company's change. Like, so you need a strategy. And I think the strategy also helps with ownership and anything in the business. Like if you've got a financial strategy or a product strategy, like someone on the senior leadership team has ownership of that. There's transparency about what the goals are. There's reporting out. Like, so I firmly believe that DEI should fit under the same accountability kind of mechanisms for any other goals. Influencing others, I think, is really key because you're only going to have a really small team, if any team at all, and you're going to need to influence people at all levels of the organization, either to shift their thinking, to prioritize this work, for them to tell their teams that this is important, for people to be willing to try and invest time and money in doing things in a different way. So those influence skills are really key. And I was trying to decide if getting cross-functional projects done is actually another kind of form of influence. I see it as being a little bit different because that's in like the shipping, like, can you get the shit done? Some of the cross-functional projects I ran were with around our employee brand. So I was working with the internal comms team and the marketing team to tell the stories of what it's like to work at Mozilla. Working with the people ops team and an expert in IT who is a Tableau expert to build out a dashboard so we could see what the metrics were and how we were tracking. That involved kind of building personal relationships with people, understanding what their skills were, being really clear about what the project was, and then moving it forward to get it done. So I think I've seen some places where there's great ideas and great intention, but the execution's not there. So I think that's really key. I'll stop sharing now.
Yeah, no, that's great. This is also so helpful. I'm gonna do a quick pivot because I knew this question was gonna come up, and so I'm gonna just get it out there and get you all's opinion on this. I'm often asked by people who are interested into getting into this field of work about whether or not they should get a DEI certificate. And we've talked a lot about the skills and the experience that you need. So I'd love you all's thoughts, maybe starting with Pina. What are your thoughts around, I know there's a lot out there. There's the Cornell, there's the IDC, there's so many different ones now on for people who are interested in working in DEI, whether it's a role similar to yours or in-house, just thoughts on the need for a certification.
Yeah, I actually don't have a very extensive answer to this. I will say that on the Paradigm team, there are some people that have those certifications, but it's not something that we talk about very broadly as a prerequisite to doing our work. And kind of related to what people, or like these 3 skills, something that I've been thinking about as I was considering this question is like my own background. So coming into my role at Paradigm, I didn't have a diversity and equity inclusion like certification, certainly not any of that. And it was mostly just like the passion and the personal motivation to learn more. And so as Brittany was saying, like the learning piece is what we find most important at Paradigm. So much of it you learn on the job. So through training through our own internal team or just learning from other people that we're doing work with. So the stakeholders like Tara when Paradigm worked with Mozilla, or within trainings, just hearing strategies and recommendations from the people in those audiences, and then taking that and passing that forward the next time you talk to a different group that would be relevant for. So certification wise, not a ton to say about that. So I would love to hear from the other 2 folks.
Yeah, Tara, did you have a thought on that one?
Got opinions on a lot of things. A lot of people ask me about the Cornell certificate. I think it's quite expensive, like $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. For that money, I don't think it's worth it. We're seeing it's an emergence-based DEI right now, and there's a lot of companies trying to monetize it. I think there's more than enough workshops like this, workshops from practitioners on lots of different issues, like around anti-racism, around psychological safety, around feedback, about debiasing the promotion process. Like there's a lot out there for free. I think like you can tell from the wildly different backgrounds the 4 of us have, it's about knowing kind of what you bring in your career, what you're interested in, and then mapping your skills. So I don't, Yeah, the people who I've seen with those certifications, I don't see them doing better work. I really love seeing people who've got the different backgrounds who just bring really rich skills, either like in curriculum development, in instructional design, in data analytics, and seeing the flavor that they bring to the work. So I'd encourage you to figure out what your superpowers are, what the work is that you love, what your strengths are. Identify the areas that you want to learn more about, and start by reading, listening to podcasts, attending webinars, and build your skills that way.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I would actually agree. I think it is an option. If you feel like you are very early in your journey and you want to get more and you have the means to do it and it's accessible to you, there's no harm in doing it and doing the certifications. I think that learning is always valuable, but I also feel like, as Sarah said, it's an emerging field. Experience is really, really valuable. Bringing other skills to this work is incredibly valuable. And I think understanding what you bring to the table is like really the most important thing. I'm always, with the work that I do as a part of my AGT Diversity Consulting work, a lot of the work that I do is helping people think about that skill mapping. What is it that you have versus what roles are you applying for? If you do not love data, you probably should not apply for a DEI analyst role. But if you love data, and like Tara was talking about, the person who was, building Tableau dashboards, if you're into BI and all those things, that may be a better fit for you. If you're really shy and you don't like presenting, maybe being a facilitator is not the right type of role for you. So you have to understand what skills and experiences you have that align to the types of roles that you may want to actually apply for. And I help work with people to think about that a little bit. So I know we've got about 10-ish minutes. I can't believe time has flown by so fast, but I want to get onto this other side because I think people often see DEI work and they can kind of come at it and they're like, oh my gosh, right? We used to have all these wonderful pride parades and, you do all the cool ERG events and things. And sometimes that can cloud a little bit of what this work actually is. And I know in my conversations with so many of you all, I've talked about like, a lot of it's about like changing behaviors, changing people's, kind of way of thinking. But the work is hard and it's very personal work for most of us who do this. So I'd love to maybe start with you, Brittany, and think about like, before you got into this work, maybe what do you wish you would have known? And the second half of that is, how do you protect your peace while you are doing this work?
That's so heavy. That's so heavy and so real. So I was thinking about this like Brittany 2.0 of version of me. I've been reflecting on that because I feel like I'm in this like current state of like a lot of self-reflection, reevaluating or remembering rather like purpose. And I thought about when I was in the corporate environment, how much I didn't know, how much I didn't, as a Black person in a predominantly white space, I found myself in that very real experiences of like doubting myself, not really having the language to name a lot of what I was experiencing, probably internalizing problematic and toxic system as something inherent to myself. And now that I have like a more critical understanding of just like how systems work, how white supremacy plays out, not just at work, but even heck, if I'm not like really mindful in how I parent and mother, now that I have a way more critical understanding of that, I have been able to manage expectations of myself, which allows me to be a little bit more gracious, and manage expectations of others, my expectations of others. And so inherently, I think because this work is so personal, I named, my Black womanness, I had always conflated like sort of like DEI and my job as my purpose, like the end all be all of it. The danger in that is when what you're experiencing doesn't start to line up with your expectations, you start to like doubt yourself, like, am I doing this right? Am I effective? Should I be doing this? Like all the things, like that's what I was doing, y'all. And so I've been really mindful of recognizing that DEI work and Brittany's role as Vice President of Learning and Innovation, my profession, is just one medium, right? It's just one medium for me to make strides towards this grander purpose. I can't put all my eggs, and by eggs, I mean like all my energy, all of it into that one medium, because it can absolutely, lead to burnout. DEI for me is my job and my work, but that's not the same as my worth, right? And so, I'm real intentional about differentiating those two, because even if people are not necessarily sort of receptive, or a session doesn't go well, or a company doesn't like the approach, that is not an indictment on me. You know what I mean? People and organizations got their own work. I even started to affirm for myself last year, y'all, like that is not my work. Because I would be in sessions thinking that I need to reach everybody, or things would happen and I would start to like, maybe I'm not the facilitator I thought I was, just all the things. And I just really had to like pause with that and just be like, you know what, that's not my work. I'm absolutely still committed and gracious and compassionate and a self-critical thinker and a community builder. And yet that is not my work, right? They are not my work. And kind of been able to differentiate and affirm that. And so if I had to sum it up, not putting all of my purpose eggs into the DEI basket is huge. There is life beyond, and ways to affect community, and ways for me to get to this state of sort of like liberation, not just for myself, but my community, that is not limited to DEI. And as a practitioner who's passionate about this self, I absolutely need to know when to say, that is not my work. That is absolutely not my work. And I didn't know that like 4 years ago. I don't know, but it's meant for me to know now.
Yeah.
That's enough.
We got all the snaps in the chat. You have said all the words, because yeah. And we're gonna, if the panelists okay, we're gonna just go over a few minutes because this is so good, and I want to kind of wrap it up, getting everybody's last kind of thoughts here. And I know there were so many good questions. I mean, there's just never enough time for this, so I appreciate everybody. So Pina, I'd love to hear the same from you. How do you protect your peace also? And what do you wish maybe you would have known before getting into this work?
Yeah, again, so much of what Brittany said, I just resonate with. But I would say even to this day, 3 years into this job, I still have a lot of imposter syndrome. Just again, questioning whether I'm actually cut out to do this job in terms of my actual skills, but also just personally as an Asian American woman, thinking about sometimes the question, I don't think it's phrased well, but am I of a marginalized group enough to have the credibility to talk about what I'm talking about? And so that's something that constantly comes up. And yet, like, I love what Brittany said in terms of this is not my worth. Like, if a session doesn't go well, if I'm not making like sweeping changes in an organization, like, what is the small win that I can still think about? Like, what is the one person that I managed to touch that might then be able to open up conversations internally with their own team and create some change? So believing and recognizing those small pieces are what are really motivating for me going forward, but also taking the time to just rest. That's something our team at Paradigm has been trying to do a lot more of, especially after the second half of last year was just so many of us burnt out. And in working for a mission-driven organization, it's really hard to say no, because it doesn't feel just like some sort of product that you're putting out that at the end of the day, you can just go home and turn it off. It's like if a client has an urgent need or an urgent question, like, why would I say no to this person, but not somebody else? And so just, yes, finding the time to actually, and boundaries, setting boundaries also so important, is just being able to say no. That's something I'm still working on.
Yes, I love that. Yes, boundary setting and rest. Let's just That is so important. I know, Brittany, you all's company over the holidays, you all took some time to rest. I appreciate it. Your out of office was like, I'm out. I'm all the way out for the holidays. So Tara, I'll give this same question to you. What do you wish you would have known before you got into doing this work, and how do you protect your peace?
So I think all the years in libraries, like I'm a big, loud person. And I think the white supremacy culture in libraries around, what professional is and what, being in an academic institution, like it made me small in a lot of ways I hadn't realized. And being a Canadian working mostly with US organizations, I can be as big and loud as I want. Like culturally, it's fine. And the louder and the more direct I am, the more impact I can make. So the first couple of months at Mozilla, I was sometimes being introduced as, Tara was a librarian, she's got a non-traditional background, and, we took a chance on her. And like the first time that kind of rubbed in a weird way. And I was like, you know what? You hired me, so I was the most qualified person. So I need you to stop doing that, because we were coaching people to give people strong introductions. Like if someone has a doctorate, introduce them as Dr. So-and-so. Explain someone new in the room with their expertise and kind of leverage your relationship and your social capital with them to set them up well. And I was like, oh, like that's not happening for me. What's wrong with me? And then I was like, you know what? There's nothing wrong with me, but this dynamic's not okay. And I need to be really clear about that. So that was a big turning point for me in speaking up and really owning my voice and power. Pina and Brittany mentioned all of these things. Last year, I decided to go back to therapy, sort of as maintenance to be able to show up and do my work well. I never thought we would be having these conversations about racism like we did last year in the workplace, and I'm really glad that we're talking about them. And as a racialized person, there was a lot of my own stuff that was coming up. And having that space with another woman of color therapist to process and feel my feels and to be like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. Or I'm just really exhausted. And her being like, yeah, that's real. That was really important for me. So for me, self-care looks like therapy. It looks like exercise. It looks like me continuing to up my practice on saying no to things. It'll be different for all of us.
Yeah. No, thank you all for sharing that. I am a huge advocate for therapy, especially for practitioners, because you carry so much weight. This work, and as I said, it's deeply personal. Obviously, if you get into this work, it's because you care. You want to see change. And sometimes that change doesn't happen fast enough, and it's frustrating, and you want people to do what you want them to do. And you take all of this on while also living your life if you are a part of a marginalized group, and experiencing everything that's happening around the world too. So you have to be able to protect your peace, protect yourself. So I do want to, just knowing we're right at time, I'm going to share with you all so you all know how to connect with these amazing panelists. You may want to grab a quick screenshot here. Brittany is on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tara's information for her LinkedIn, Inclusion Diversity, is there, as well as Pina's information. Thank you so much to my panelists. You all can also connect with me. Here is my information. You can find me on all of the things. And then for those of you all, especially if you're on the YouTube, I would love if you all would just use your camera phones and go into this survey. I would love your feedback. I'm looking to do more of these. I plan to start doing them monthly, but would love your feedback on this. And then lastly, I will just leave you with, if any of you all are interested in learning more about how to work with me, I do have 3 different ways you can work with me in terms of my intro to DEI course, which just gives a little bit of information around some of the most common roles in DEI in corporate spaces. I do one-on-one career advisory sessions, especially for people who are looking to update their resumes, figure out how to align their experiences to the types of roles they may be interested in. And then the DEI Career Package, which includes kind of a little bit of all of this and a few additional one-on-one sessions. So you can go onto my website, as I mentioned, to connect with me to find out more about that. But again, thank you all so much for being here, for taking time out of you all's day to join this conversation. And I look forward to doing this again. And thank you, Pina, Brittany, and Tara for being here. You all are amazing. Thanks and have a great day, everyone.